All right, we are live. Hello, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael Music. We are getting into it today. So, a little bit about me. I've been reading this book, Think and Grow Rich, and basically every week, just diving into one of the principles that Napoleon Hill has been talking about. And this brings us today to the chapter on imagination. So we're going to spend this week talking a little bit about the imagination, and I'm really excited because this is a great chapter in terms of how deep it gets. Like, if you really think about it, let me ask you, like, how deep can your imagination go? Like, what are the limits to the imagination? And we're going to dive in. I hope that as we go through this week, you may get a little bit of a deeper level understanding on how powerful imagination plays in the role of Think and Grow Rich in this entire philosophy and getting whatever it is that you wrote down on your goal card. So, yeah, this is chapter 6, Imagination, the workshop of the mind, is the fifth step toward riches. And we're going to do, I'm basically going to read first 4 days, just read, share my thoughts, ask some questions, and on the fifth day we're gonna do just a little summary on the chapter of imagination. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The imagination is literally the workshop wherein are fashioned all plans created by man. The impulse, the desire, is given shape, form, and action through the aid of the imaginative faculty of the mind. It has been said that man can create anything which he can imagine. Okay, let's break this paragraph down. So where are the plans created by man? And using the imaginative faculty, what what uh what does Hill say here? He's saying that the impulse, the desire, is given shape, form, and action through this imaginative faculty of the mind. So, what does that look like to you? And do you or do I truly believe the statement that that man can create anything which he can imagine? There's this statement. I think it's on my gold card right here. I'm not sure if you can see it. It says, "Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve." And now the question is not whether or not this is a fact or true or false, but the question is, do I actually believe this statement? Do I believe that there really is no depth to the imagination? And I think a big part of really believing this, believing this idea that you can create anything you can imagine, comes down to studying and further understanding of how powerful this force really is. And so it's all right if you think this is a little bit of hoorah right now. My intention is that by the end of us going through these principles, you may start to develop a bigger understanding, and you might actually start to be like, okay, now this is genuinely making sense what we're talking about here. So I'm going to keep reading. Hill says, of all the ages of civilization, this is the most favorable for the development of the imagination because it is an age of rapid change. On every hand, one may contact stimuli which develop the imagination. What does that mean? On every hand, one may contact stimuli which develop the imagination. What does that mean? I'll leave that up to you. Through the aid of his imaginative faculty, man has discovered and harnessed more of nature's forces during the past 50 years than during the entire history of the human race previous to that time. He has conquered the air so completely that the birds are a poor match for him in flying. He has harnessed the ether and made it serve as a means of instantaneous communication with any part of the world. He has analyzed and weighed the sun at a distance of millions of miles and has determined through the aid of imagination the elements of which it consists. He has discovered that his own brain is both a broadcasting and a receiving station for the vibration of thought, and he is beginning now to learn how to make practical use of this discovery. He has increased the speed of locomotion until he may now travel at a speed of more than 300 miles an hour. The time will soon come when a man may breakfast in New York and lunch in San Francisco. So we just talked about all these wonderful inventions that man has created, and it's really interesting. Like going back, let's say 100 to 200 years from now, the idea of even airplanes flying in the sky, like look at where we're at now with the internet. This wouldn't even possibly make sense to someone back when this book was even written. So it's if you really acknowledge how fast man is going with the imagination, and it's only going exponentially now that we realize the power of the internet, we can communicate with anyone from anywhere. This was all at one point just an idea, which is incredible to really think about. And like when it comes to predicting the future, right? Like just imagine how much further life is going to advance even 10 years from now. It's just going exponentially up at this point. So I wanted to pause on one point that he said, which I'm really excited to get into in a further chapter. Napoleon Hill says that he has discovered that his own brain is both a broadcasting and a receiving station for the vibration of thought. And he is beginning now to learn how to make practical use of this discovery. So, one thing that we are learning as humans is just the power of our brain. And one great thing about this philosophy is that it actually dedicates a whole chapter to the brain, because I noticed that a lot of people, when they talk about building a better mindset or personal development or what it takes to truly become rich, they only focus on the thoughts of a person. But we're not having a conversation about the importance of truly upgrading your brain so that you can actually just think better and all areas of your life become better, right? We're talking about a lot of people when they're on lives and they're doing these courses, they're talking about mindset, thoughts, this and that. And we're talking about software, right? Like me talking to you through this computer in this video is talking about software, but we're not talking about upgrading the hardware. So I just say this all to say, in a further chapter, we're going to really dive deep into the brain, and definitely is just as crucial as any other chapter in this book or principle to really embody this philosophy. So now we're going to dive into a big idea that is condensed in one sentence on the imagination. And Hill says that man's only limitation within reason lies in his development and use of his imagination. So I'll repeat that. Man's only limitation within reason lies in his development and use of his imagination. That's a pretty big idea. What does that idea mean to you? What does it mean that your only limitation lies in the development of your imagination and how you use it? Right? Is there truly any real boundary in our life than the boundary that we place on our own selves? And that's directed right to me too. Like, am I holding myself back? Are these outside conditions, circumstances, and environment truly holding me back, or is it the way that I'm thinking about it? So that's really cool. He has not yet reached the apex of development in the use of his imaginative faculty. He has merely discovered that he has an imagination and has commenced to use it in a very elementary way. So, really powerful stuff. First 2 pages. That's really cool stuff I learned about the imagination. So, what I'm going to do is continue on. I just want to dive deep into these pages of the imagination because it's so cool. But we're going to now talk about the 2 forms of imagination. And as I read on, you'll understand that there are 2 different ways to use your imagination. And I like to think of it like a T chart. Like you got the imagination at top, and you got 2 different ways of using your imagination. So let's just get right into it. The imaginative faculty functions in 2 forms. One is known as synthetic imagination, and the other as creative imagination. So, synthetic imagination, Napoleon Hill says, through this faculty, one may arrange old concepts, ideas, or plans into new combinations. This faculty creates nothing, it merely works with the material of experience, education, and observation with which it is fed. It is the faculty used most by the inventor, with the exception of the genius, who draws upon the creative imagination when he cannot solve his problem through the synthetic imagination. So, what exactly is the synthetic imagination according to Hill? Are we creating new ideas through the synthetic imagination, or are we using old experiences, ideas, and education to come up and create these plans? And we'll soon find out which do we focus on more. So I'll get to that later, but let me first explain now the creative imagination, and we'll talk about the 2. So now there's the synthetic imagination that we just said, where you basically arrange old concepts, plans, ideas into basically new combinations. It's almost like you tried this way, it didn't work. You're going to adapt some elements from an old experience or observation, maybe mix it up a little bit, and you're using that imaginative faculty to create your plans. Now, the creative imagination. Hill says, through this faculty of creative imagination, the finite mind of man has direct communication with infinite intelligence. It is the faculty through which hunches and inspirations are received. It is by this faculty that all basic or new ideas are handed over to man. It is through this faculty that thought vibrations from the minds of others are received. It is through this faculty that one individual may tune in or communicate with the subconscious minds of other men. Holy crap. I'm going to break this paragraph down because that was a lot that we just talked about. All right, so what is the creative imagination? Well, bold statement right off the bat. He says that through the creative imagination, you can do what? Who do you have direct communication with through the creative imagination? Hill says that the finite mind of man has direct communication with infinite intelligence. What does that look like? What does it look like? Direct communication with infinite intelligence. He then says it is the faculty through which hunches and inspirations are received. So let me ask you, have you ever just had a thought come to you, and maybe it wasn't like a thought, it was more so a hunch or an inspiration where you're just thinking, I got to do this. I got to try this way, and it has led you on this road that you may not have been on if you were just thinking constantly about it through your old experiences, but something just hit you out of nowhere. Like, this is an idea that I got to take action on. Have you ever had a hunch or inspiration in that sense? So if you have, that is your creative imagination at play. And furthermore, he says, it is by this faculty that all basic or new ideas are handed over to man. So, have you ever received a new idea that may have seemed to come from nowhere? But then again, it's like you knew it came from somewhere, right? Think about it. We're talking about a direct communication with infinite intelligence here. So this is very important, and it's surprising. You won't be using the creative imagination as much as we'll get into later, but this is some very interesting stuff. Finally, he says, it is through this faculty that thought vibrations from the minds of others are received. It is through this faculty that one individual may tune in or communicate with the subconscious minds of other men. That's interesting. So for most, they will be like, I don't even understand that. What does he mean? The thought vibrations from other minds are received. Have you ever Have you ever just looked at someone and you don't know what it is, but you just kind of got like a negative vibe from them? You're like, all right, they're not thinking in positive terms. And you kind of got this hunch from them, like, okay, I gotta maybe keep my distance, maybe put up a wall against them, right? That could be one example of your creative imagination of use. And and then we're going to get further into through this faculty, you may tune in or communicate with the subconscious minds of other men. Now, that is a question I may not have an answer to, but what does that mean to you to tune in and communicate with the subconscious minds of other men? Very, very powerful paragraph, I thought, on the creative imagination, and we're gonna understand furthermore. We're gonna actually dive really deep into the creative imagination. I think there's a whole chapter on it. It is called the sixth sense, and essentially, think of the sixth sense and the creative imagination as synonyms for one another. You can replace the two, right? The sixth sense is the creative imagination. Anyways, let's read on. So Hill says the creative imagination works automatically in the manner described in subsequent pages. This faculty functions only when the conscious mind is vibrating at an exceedingly rapid rate, as for example, when the conscious mind is stimulated through the emotion of a strong desire. Okay, let me repeat that again. This we're going to dive deep into the creative imagination, as I truly want to understand this better, and I really want to have a conversation with you all watching this about it. So it functions only when the conscious mind is vibrating at an exceedingly rapid rate, as for example, when the conscious mind is stimulated through the emotion of a strong desire. Okay, keep this in mind. As I've been reading, there's been numerous mentions of thought stimuli, right? We're gonna I think it's in the mystery of sexual transmutation that we're gonna dive into the major sources of thought stimuli. But for right now, let's focus on stimulating your mind. You can literally stimulate your thoughts to a higher level of thinking through the emotion of a strong desire. So, did you know that desire is an emotion? When you, let me ask you this, when you feel that you have truly mastered the idea of a strong desire, do you have it held in your head, or do you feel it through your entire body? There's a difference between the two. There's a difference between wanting a thing and having a strong desire for that thing. So I'll just explain real quick. The want is in our conscious mind, it is our thinking mind that's thinking, I want this, I want that. It's almost wishful thinking. But having a burning desire, you will feel it in every cell of your body. Now, what happens is when you do master the first principle laid out in Think and Grow Rich, what this strong desire will do will stimulate your mind to a high level of thinking, which may put the creative, imaginative faculty into action. So, if you want to understand, like, how can you elevate your thoughts? Let's go back to the first principle, which is let's first develop a strong, burning desire. Okay. Now Hill goes on to say, the creative faculty becomes more alert, more receptive to vibrations from the sources mentioned in proportion to its development through use. This statement is significant. Ponder over it before passing on. Okay, let's repeat this then. If he wants us to really hone in on this statement here. The creative faculty becomes more alert through where the creative faculty becomes more alert, more receptive to vibrations from the sources mentioned in proportion to its development through use. Okay. So we're talking about developing the imagination. What can we relate this to? Have you ever focused on going to the gym and working out a muscle, a physical muscle like your biceps? What would you do? You keep curling, right? Now, we're talking about the imagination. Now, this is one of our higher faculties of our mind. So so how do we develop the imagination? And if we're relating it to the simile of developing a muscle like your bicep, how do you do that? Well, it's through use. So, how do you use your imagination constantly so that you're developing the faculties that we have just described here? Or not the faculties, the two forms of your imagination. So, so we're going to probably talk about that later in this chapter. I just want to have those questions open to you so that you begin thinking about this stuff. He says, keep in mind as you follow these principles that the entire story of how one may convert desire into money cannot be told in one statement. The story will be complete only when one has mastered, assimilated, and begun to make use of all the principles. Okay, so I will be the first to admit I tried to summarize this book in one statement. And that statement that I made, that one sentence liner of the entire book, is most likely just wrong. You cannot understand this book or this entire story until you have mastered, assimilated, and begun to make use of all of the principles. So it's the basics. I'm really noticing that every principle that we have talked about here leads to the other. They all tie into one another. Furthermore, the great leaders of business, industry, and finance, and the great artists, musicians, poets, and writers became great because they developed the faculty of creative imagination. Both the synthetic and creative faculties of imagination become more alert with use, just as any muscle or organ of the body develops through use. Okay, so we have ended it off on simply 4 pages. We're going to leave it there. So I want to ask you, what'd you learn, what'd you like so far from the imagination? And I'll just share a recap of some of the things we went over. We talked about a bold statement that man can create anything which he can imagine. That was a bold statement. And furthermore, that the only limitation man has lies in his development and use of his imagination. And then finally, what we talked about today was diving into the two forms of imagination, which is synthetic imagination and creative imagination. So I really enjoyed learning about the two. Now I'm gonna leave it up to you guys. Like, what'd you learn? What'd you like? I'm probably gonna end it off there, and what we'll continue on is further just discussion about the imagination, what it means, and how to really take this idea to the next level. So I want to thank you all for watching. This is some episode in the 50s, I'm not sure, but we have talked about the imagination. We're going to talk about the imagination for the rest of this week. And finally, I'm going to wrap it up with a good summary about it. So I want to thank you all for watching. I'll leave you how I always leave you until we meet again in time and space. Who knows when you'll be watching this video, but I appreciate you very much for watching it. So bye for now. Peace out.